Yeah, I guess just get the fuck out of here. Hello. Hello. I'm Andy Fordyce, and I'm here to talk to you about the music of Luke Chrisinger. 28-year-old Luke Chrisinger is a post-musician, a non-artist, an avant videographer, and an anti-writer. He lives just south of White River Junction in Vermont. He works at a community access television station and works on all of his artwork from home. He's recorded over 300 self-produced albums. These albums range anywhere in length from one short single track to full 80-minute CDR length. This number, 300, is exclusive in any collaborations. Him and I have collaborated on a number of projects under the monikers Color and Block, and Go Cats Go. You know, influences can often be misleading, especially in this day and age. Luke tends to call his music post-rock, which, for sake of time, I won't go into. That's a separate lecture, really. But at this point in time, we're able to reference and synthesize rock language over the past 60 years and beyond at will. And that goes for harmonic, melodic, rhythmic choices, sonic recording options. This is all at our fingertips. If I had to summarize Luke's music, I might feel comfortable saying that Luke's music combines Jandek's use of raw, unfiltered gesture, the lo-fi multi-tracking approach of the microphones, and an interpretation of the grunge aesthetic of Nirvana. I'm going to propose that Luke's music uses a form of composition, a process that I will call improvised multi-tracking. Improvised multi-tracking isn't wholly a new idea, since we've had the recording studio at our fingertips, so one only need look at the studio work of Brian Wilson, the Beatles, to see that composition and the layering that makes the final recording is done somewhat in real time throughout the recording process. But I am going to propose that Luke's music pushes this process to an extreme. Let's just talk a little bit about what Luke says about his own recording process. In an email dated December 10th, Luke writes, "Process. Record something. Usually drums first. Then something else. Sometimes a song emerges, sometimes not. Mix as I record, export the song. Then while recording the next song, I am uploading the previous one to Bandcamp. Occasionally I will write a song ahead of time. Sometimes there will be an idea or a concept, but in the end it will never be what was imagined." So let me look at my notes here. Yes, the important line is where he says, "Usually drums first." I want to propose that nearly all of the music of Luke Chrisinger, his recorded output, has some kind of an identifiable motivic kernel. This is the seed that dictates more or less the formal structure of the song, and it also largely informs what will be the melodic, harmonic, rhythmic content to be added in the next layers. In a lot of the rock music, this is the drums. I know when we collaborate, we often hit record and then play 2, 3, 4 minutes of drum thing, and this usually determines the formal structure. Improvising musician Joe Morris talks about a model, an interactive model for improvisation, free improvisation usually, where he talks about the following possible options: solo, unison, complement, juxtaposition, and silence. These are 5 choices that, when interacting with another layer or another individual, you can choose. What's particularly unique about this process is that what the thing is only emerges with the addition of each new layer throughout the process. Nothing is usually worked out ahead of time. But I want to propose that there's a sort of psychoanalytic element to Lou Chrisinger's process. Everything seems to be channeled from the unconscious, and there seems to be a striving towards less filtering than more filtering. The psychoanalytic element is looking at what's been created and trying to see what signifiers are there after the fact and what they might be. This is how we interpret dreams. Throughout this process, Lou Chrisinger draws upon rock language as a veritable database of sonic and gestural options. Let's take a moment and discuss Lou Chrisinger's technical setup in the studio. It's very basic. Some might call it primitive. He has a couple of basic microphones, a couple dynamic, I believe, one condenser microphone that I know of. He runs these into a mixer, which is fed to his iMac computer. No interface or fancy outboard gear used. The mixer is just fed into the 1/8" microphone input on the computer itself, and recorded into Logic, which is a digital audio workstation software. We provide a little bit of brief technical background for recording. Sound waves are changes in air pressure over time. The diaphragm of the microphone measures these sound waves and converts them into an electrical signal that travels throughout the cable. This is purely just current, just electrical signal. When it gets to the computer takes this signal and makes its best interpretation of that signal into ones and zeros, the binary language that the computer understands. This is a very close approximation of what that analog audio signal is, which is, of course, then digital. Usually when recording, good audio practice would dictate that you should check the level of the incoming signal to make sure that it is not overloading the converter, which converts the analog signal to digital. This is usually called clipping. It causes a kind of distortion, which is usually found objection. Sometimes clipping can be sought after, and especially in the analog domain, with tape machines and tubes, can be a certain kind of warm, saturated sound within a controlled way that can be pleasurable. But it's generally thought of that digital distortion, digital clipping, is very unpleasant. However, Lou Chrisinger tends to use distortion and clipping of his digital converter of his computer to create an effect. This is pretty much always done to varying degrees and provides much of the sonic character of the music itself. This also allows him to record very quickly because he does not take the time to ensure that the levels are set. He just sets them up, turns them up so they should be and not soft, and then begins recording. So this adds a distorted element on drums, guitars. I know sometimes he doesn't even use guitar pedals for distortion, but just turns the gain up on the mixer enough where it is just absolutely clipping as hard as possible with the computer. And this creates its own distortion. It's somewhat like the distortion of a distortion pedal on a guitar. But in general, from 50 years ago to now, or even 20 years ago now, we've seen... I'm going to wait until this truck is done. Okay. With the loudness wars, we see an overall decrease in dynamic range throughout pop and rock songs. This decrease has happened over the last 50 years, even over the last 20 years, even over the last 10 to 15, we've noticed huge squishing of dynamic range.
Bearing all this in mind, let's consider a few examples. It is around the time of the album Sea Anemone that the era of the so-called rock EPs begins. These albums are very short in length, usually in a 3 or 5 song format, with the songs often being roughly a minute and a half long. The third track from Sea Anemone is a useful place to begin. This is where we'll begin to see an obvious commentary on or reaction to the commercial pop rock format. These tracks are not very dynamic and tend to end abruptly after the most essential amount of information has been transmitted, with minimal repeating of sections. In Sea Anemone 3, a track with a length of 1 minute and 58 seconds, we have an acoustic guitar kernel which repeats the same 2 chords with only a slight variation in the last section. 2 takes of the same drum part are panned in stereo, and then multiple vocals in unison join after that. A second section is marked by the entrance of a heavily distorted bass line, the addition of shakers, and a tambourine-type backbeat. The third section could be called a chorus. It has a repeating, chant-like vocal part, and a slight change in the chord progression. The song then quickly falls into a free coda section. The track from Sea Anemone is distorted and clipped, but not nearly as much as the first track of the 3-song EP Elephants. At only 48 seconds in length, Elephants 1 is an extreme example of an essentialist rock song. The instrumentation here is electric guitar, distorted not through effect pedals but through the harsh clipping of the converter, bass, drums, tambourine, and vocals. The song is in an ABA form and begins and ends without any kind of intro or outro. The melody is derived from the primary motive from C to D and is elaborated in the B section. In these very short EPs, the songs are barely complete thoughts, where the meaning is derived from the relation to the whole, and the whole's meaning is derived from the substance of its parts. The EP Ouroboros has to me the most extreme case of distortion and perceived loudness in all of Luke Chrisinger's output. It is distorted to the point where specific instrumentation is nearly indistinguishable, and all we are left with is pure gesture. At 40 seconds in length, Ouroboros 2 is a particularly illuminating example. On the spectrograph, you can see that nearly the entire frequency range is saturated. The song is a good example of what Guy Capuzzo calls sectional tonality and sectional centricity in rock music. In both the guitar and vocal part, the first section of this A-B-A-B form is centered on B-flat, with a jump a fourth above to E-flat. The second section jumps down a fourth from B-flat to G-flat, leaving any real assurance of an absolute tonic aside. Depending on the section, or one of its brief transitional moments, the tonic could almost feel like any of these pitches. Gesturally, the A section consists of call and response between the B-flat in the guitar and vocal, and fills on the drum set. We can hear the distorted drum punctuations in the A section represented on the spectrograph. When the cymbals burst through the mix, we see that all registers are excited as cymbals have particularly bright and complex spectral information. The B section of the song shows an attempt at a chord progression, but then falls apart after one iteration, interrupted by palm-muted chugs on the guitar over a basic backbeat. The song returns to the A section, much like before, and then presents a more complete and final statement of the B, chorus. This type of song not only comments on the commercial tendency to want to sell us an idea in the shortest duration of time, and with only the most essential information, but it also carries out the evolution of distortion in rock music to an extreme degree. From Howlin' Wolf to Jimi Hendrix to Kurt Cobain and beyond, there seems to be this need, especially with the electric guitar, to want to distort it and bring out the most saturated quality possible. Through these examples, we have a small window into the massive and continuously ongoing musical output of Luke Chrisinger. His work is developed through a number of eras over the roughly 10-year span of its existence, and these selections are just a particular cross-section representative of the most rock-like of his offerings. While somewhat broad in its scope, my hope is that this analysis might serve as a springboard for those who wish to examine more contemporary rock musicians. Musicians whose process lies somewhere in the space between composition and improvisation, and in an era where production tools are increasingly at our fingertips.